This is Dr. Warren Vander Hill interviewing Dr. Wayne Payne, Emeritus Professor of Physiology and Health Science for the Ball State History Project, October 11th, 2004. Wayne, I want to begin by thanking you for your assistance with my project. And as a kind of a first background question, I'd like you to tell me about your educational background before you came to Ball State, where you went to school, where you're from, where you got your degrees, et cetera, et cetera.
That's an interesting question.
Okay.
I'm actually a Fort Wayne native.
Okay.
Graduated from high school in 1959. At that point, I started my undergraduate work at Butler University, and at the end of the first semester, I decided I wasn't ready for college and the fraternity in pre-med. So I left and went into a 2-year diploma program in X-ray technology at Parkview Hospital in Fort Wayne. I completed that, and then for a year I was the operating room radiographer for a neurosurgical team that was doing experimental surgery on the prediction of seizure states, implanting electrodes into the brain that could be monitored by early telemetry. After a year of being in the operating room, sometimes as many as 17 hours, eventually as short as 12 hours, I decided that I didn't want to do that for a living. So I had a cousin that was, I believe, in her junior year at Ball State, and she told me that I would enjoy this school. So I came in the fall of 1961 as an undergraduate student, probably one of the early non-traditional students, since I was already in my early 20s. I had found out through physicians that it was not absolutely necessary to have an undergraduate degree or even be eligible for an undergraduate degree at the completion of the first year of medical school, so long as you were certain that you had all of the core classes covered. I wrote to Dean Mahoney at IU Medical School in Indianapolis, and he assured me this was true, although not generally disseminated. So I essentially set up my own curriculum here, and at the end of 2 years, without any physical education or many of the undergraduate general studies classes, I was admitted to IU School of Medicine in both the MD and the PhD program. At the end of the first year of medical school, I joined a group of 23 students that, for a variety of reasons, were given an opportunity to repeat the first year of medical school again, conditional upon doing a master's in a preclinical biological science such as genetics or embryology. I applied for the graduate program in human anatomy at the University of South Carolina, and they told me, in the absence of only having 2 years of college, they did not consider me suitable for their graduate program. At that point, I returned to Ball State, finished my undergraduate degree with a major in biology and a minor in chemistry. That was in 1966. I taught a year of 9th grade biology in Fort Wayne, at which point I met my wife, and I returned to Ball State to do a master's in health education after having been offered a fellowship in the MPH program at the University of North Carolina. I completed the MS in health education. I returned to the public schools for a year so that my wife could complete her undergraduate degree, and in the fall of 1969 I was one of 7 recruited for the doctoral program that was just beginning at the University of Tennessee, which I was fortunate, I suppose, for a number of reasons, to finish in 2 years. So in 1971 I interviewed at Western Illinois, Western Kentucky, and had an open invitation from Warren Schaller, the department head at Ball State, to return if I so cared. I accepted that invitation. The dean of the College of Education at the University of Tennessee told me upon parting that Ball State was a great place to begin a career, or a great place to end a career, but surely somewhere in between I would find greener grass. I never found it, although I was recruited for a program in health education at the University of Virginia. We interviewed, could not afford the housing. A friend of mine, Keith Howell from the University of Tennessee, took the position, and it lasted 1 year. So I think in retrospect I was very fortunate to have chosen a place where I could not only begin, but I could end my career.
A tortuous path,
yeah.
for sure. Well, with all of that in your background, which I must say only about 10% I knew before we began this conversation, but it really is extremely atypical, as you're well aware. What were your expectations as a faculty member when you came here?
Well, I'm not certain that I had many expectations, or particularly insightful expectations. I had enjoyed as an undergraduate, a number of faculty. I liked their relaxed approach to instruction. I very much liked their humanistic dealing with students, or at least in my case it was so. I envisioned, I suppose, a career in the classroom, getting to know students well, not necessarily being a friend to students, but a professional friend-like mentor. I never recall my faculty as either an undergraduate or a graduate student doing a great deal in terms of what I might call scholarly activity. They were very much involved in the national organizations and seemed to take a great deal of satisfaction from that, but largely their careers were in the classroom. So I guess my expectations in 1971 was a career as a classroom teacher.
In what ways then did Ball State change while you were a faculty member here? My second question is going to be in what ways it remained the same, so if you want to go back and forth between the two, that's fine.
Let me begin by saying at the start of my third year, I had an opportunity to go to our London Center, which was a program that had not existed when I was an undergraduate or even a graduate student. I followed that up by an opportunity to continue that academic year in Germany as a part of the Masters in Public Service Administration. So I think one thing that has changed and has grown far beyond those experiences are opportunities for involvement internationally and in ways that lie simply classroom teaching. I suppose the second thing, and this may be a somewhat unique perspective that I may feel more strongly about than most, was our switch from the quarter system to the semester system. As a science undergraduate major, we met in lecture 4 times a week, and on what at that time we called the float day, where there was a 2-hour block of time, we met in lab. And I think it truly facilitated, even though only an 11-week period of time, it truly facilitated getting to know students. And invariably on the float day, the faculty, and particularly the graduate students, and often a few undergraduates, had the leisure ability to walk to the student center for a full hour of argument or discussion or any of the 3 forbidden topics, sex, politics, and sports.
Right.
And I think going to the semester system did decrease that kind of intense contact with a small group of students. So I would include that as a change. I think,
but you don't necessarily see it as a change for the better.
Well, I certainly got used to the semester system, and I like the ability, with the assistance of the department, to have either a 3-day a week teaching schedule, or in many cases a 2-day, in comparison to what the science people had, and that was a 5-day
Right.
schedule. So I adjusted and probably would not at this point go back to a semester system, but yet it certainly, in my opinion, diminished the humanity that was much more easily established between, I think, particularly undergraduates and faculty members.
Okay.
The third thing that changed, and you have already touched on this, was the arrival of a new provost at a time in my own career when I had moved through the rank of assistant and associate professor and was recommended by the college for promotion to full, and for reasons that I believe related to a textbook that had entered the marketplace very successfully, but had apparently not been reviewed yet, seemed to be a salient factor in holding me back. I think that was a major change in terms of the emphasis on scholarly productivity, and certainly put an end to the old expectations of being a reasonably competent teacher, being active on campus in various committees and councils, maybe serving on a local board of an agency appropriate to your discipline, and maybe writing a descriptive article of some kind, but even that did not seem to be an overwhelmingly important thing. So I would point out those three: the opportunity for travel and international experience, the end of the quarter system, and the arrival of a provost who strongly emphasized promotion.
As you look back on those changes from the lofty vantage point of fall 2004, do you view them in the aggregate as being positive changes for the university or negative changes?
Well, I think it added an entire new dimension to the latter half of my career. So I think from a personal point of view, I see it in the overall as being positive. If I try to stand in the shoes of young faculty, having been on faculty searches, I'm not certain that I would prioritize very highly either classroom teaching or any kind of particular mentoring process, although I know it happens. So I think it's, in my mind, somewhat of a washout, and I would simply leave it at that.
Okay. Well, in your department, for example, just to take this one step further, do you advise new faculty when they come here that they better pretty quickly get their scholarly house in order, or they're not going to succeed ultimately in attaining tenure? Is that a fair statement?
No, absolutely. Having served on 3 or 4 search committees in the last 10 years of my career, it was such a critical factor that it was quite clearly stated. I can't recall that any numbers were assigned to articles or grant applications, but it was certainly a clearly stated expectation.
Who are some of the people who had a particular impact on you when you were here, either positively or negatively? You mentioned Warren Vander Hill as one, but I'd like you to dwell on that theme.
The Department of Physiology and Health Science evolved out of a huge department, simply called the Science Department, when the school began the process of moving toward university status and away from being simply a teacher's college or only a teacher's college. That department was almost unmanageable in the final analysis with so many disciplines thrown together. And the Department of Physiology and Health Science came out of that with Warren Vander Hill, a relatively young faculty member at the time, being the head. Warren stayed in that capacity for well over 20 years, perhaps closer to 30, before his health failed and eventually he died prematurely. Warren seemed to have a grasp on everything at every level, from the department through the college to the president's office, at least at certain times. So it was always very comfortable to be under Warren's leadership, because you always knew that he was resourceful and supported very thoroughly his faculty. He also, in my opinion, mentored young faculty very well. He had an interesting relationship with his wife, Judith. She was so certain that Warren's department was the place that you would literally fall in love with, and Muncie would be a community that you would rapidly become a part of, that she submitted your name to a local swim club 2 years prior to you having any really substantial idea that you were coming to Ball State. So when my wife and I arrived in the fall of 1971 without children, and both of us being non-swimmers, we found out very soon that we owed $300 or something like that to belong to Catalina Club, and we said we've not applied for membership, and Judith said, "Oh, I put your name in 1.5 years ago." So being under Warren, and in a sense under Judy, who initiated you to the community, it was a very secure and well organized and very smooth transition into the academic world here. My mentor as a faculty member had to have been Dr. Charles Carroll. Charlie, as he was known here in Muncie, was a master teacher, and he and I had a long relationship of being close friends, and we maintained that well into retirement.
And he, of course, was the great organizer, as I remember from my honors college career, of probably the two most famous honors colloquia, which the students long ago dubbed honors death and honors sex.
Those were Charlie's two areas. He is still alive, and I'm not certain that he has quite the interest in the former area that might once have been true, but he is a jewel. There were also people out of the department that I had far less contact with, but that I always enjoyed in various ways and respected, and I might say yourself included, Warren.
Thank you.
In some cases, they were individuals that actually were carrying over from my undergraduate days. People like Whitney Gordon and Dave Scruton from anthropology, and Jim List from biology, and Jerry Doden from chemistry. These were faculty members that were from the old vintage, but just reflecting on them gave me some comfort when I looked around at the new breed of faculty that were far more prevalent in the latter years of my career.
But one thing I have to ask you as a kind of somewhat captive physiology and health science professor here this morning. One of the things that Warren Shallard wanted to get me interested in doing when I was provost was to champion the cause of having a doctoral program in your department, and I was never very enthusiastic about it. I'm just going to ask you, as you look back now, do you think your department should have had a doctoral program?
Probably not, at least at the time that Warren wanted that to happen. I say that because we had a specialists program that had been federally funded, and I think the faculty that were here at the time, a lot of them coming through the old process that we've discussed earlier, would not have really been capable of supporting the research that would have been necessary to have a highly effective doctoral program.
Yeah, that was ultimately my conclusion, and I don't mind telling you, even on tape, that I had a wonderful weekend this past weekend, because my alma mater, Hope College, had a celebration of 100 years of Hope College basketball. One of the esteemed figures in your area of expertise, Darrell Siedentop from Ohio State, was there, because of course he was a teammate of mine at Hope. And now for the record of posterity, I don't mind telling you that when Warren came to me with the idea of having a doctoral program, the written materials he sent me, I sent to Darrell Siedentop at OSU to to see what he thought of it. He said that he didn't think that your department, as you have eloquently put it here, had the research power to really sustain a doctoral program. His view being that if you were going to have one, and it couldn't be in the top 25 in the country, there wasn't really any reason to put the resources in it. But I was kind of intrigued as you look back on that period, because Warren was very fervent in wanting to have that kind of badge, if you will, of having a doctoral program in your department.
Well, I think some of that came out of a 1981 survey put out by the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana that ranked our undergraduate program as first in the nation, whatever that means. But I think that enthusiasm was probably a factor fueling the idea that already with a master's and a specialist, it would not be a quantum leap in terms of organization and faculty to move up to the doctoral level.
Okay. Could you tell me a little bit about some areas that you may have been involved with outside the department, but within the university? You know, some particular areas that were near and dear to your heart, as far as I guess what we like to call, still these days, the area of service to the university.
Yes. One of the things that Warren Schaller made certain of was that from literally the end of the first quarter, you were involved in service to the college and to the university. At this point, I can't remember all of the councils and committees that I served on, but one was academic affairs and another one was the professional affairs council. On the latter one, I was on when a very, I think, significant, or at least quite well-known event occurred, and that was the censoring of a department head when he sent around information to his faculty that if they used the services of a particular bank in the city of Muncie, that he would not look favorably upon their tenure or promotion, as the case would be. So I definitely remember spending a lot of hours in dealing with an individual that was, by definition, a very strong personality. I served on the...
Would you mention who that is? I've kind of forgotten that.
Bob Robinson from Philosophy.
Oh, yes, yeah. He had once had an office next door to me when I first came in.
Well, anyway.
Yeah, right.
At that time, there was some situation involving members of the board and the fact that state monies allocated regionally in the state went to a local bank that the CEO was a member of the board, and thus the focus of all of this concern on Dr. Robinson's point. I served on the council that wrote the initial policy for weapons on campus, and in fact I wrote the rough draft of that policy. That was Campus and Student Affairs Council. One council that I served on, that council I served on a number of years, and really enjoyed it because it was composed of not only faculty and administrators but also students. And I think that's the only time that I had an opportunity to serve on any kind of governance body that involved student input. So those are three that come to mind.
Okay. How about in the community or in some professional areas?
Okay. I served for a number of years on the board of Planned Parenthood of East Central Indiana. In fact, during a time of significant growth of that organization, including buying and refurbishing the Moore Clinic, which had been a prominent outpatient medical clinic for a number of years in Muncie. I was vice president of that board for several years, and a very prominent attorney in town, Bernie Friend, was president, and I know that I enjoyed that situation because so much was accomplished in a few short years, including clinics in Marion and Portland and outside of Muncie. I still remain an active board member on Alpha Center Adult Day Services, active in my church. active, I think, to a degree in the community. I'm a volunteer at the hospital and the cardiac cath lab. So, you know, I've found Muncie a very comfortable place to live and a fairly easy place to support.
A question I'll get to in a few moments, a more specific comment on that. I think in the kind of larger picture of the role of the faculty at Ball State, we hear a lot today about more interest in having a faculty senate, more interest in trying to really push the agenda, if you will, on the concept that we're both aware of called shared governance. And as you look back over your long and distinguished career at Ball State, how do you see the role of the faculty? I mean, is it different today than it was when you came? If it's changed, why do you think that's occurred?
Well, I think one reason that it's changed is that early in my career, being an active and vocal and evident member of committees and councils, which certainly fulfilled the political aspirations of some faculty members,
Well put.
was a mark of success on campus and was a significant player in promotion. My belief today is that although faculty may ask and demand greater governance or a greater role in it, I think it would only serve in some cases to be a detriment if one became too active in it, and that took away from research and publication.
Okay.
So I'm not certain that a lot of people would find it as profitable as they would find it interesting and fulfilling.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think that we're now almost at a juncture where there is to be a new governance document presented to the Board of Trustees that faculty have been working on for the last 3 or 4 years, and I've had some kind of tangential interest in that, because in it would be something closer to what the two of us would call a faculty senate. I say that in the context of realizing in the years that we were here that the faculty never really was able to speak with a singular, clear voice. It was always the university senate where you had people, well, like me for many years as an administrator, and you had a lot of student members. And so faculty would come to me often and say, there's no way for you or the president of the board to really hear a clear faculty voice, if indeed you could ever hear a clear faculty voice. That's the reason I asked you the question, is whether or not there ought to be at Ball State an opportunity for the faculty to speak as a faculty senate and not to have their voice, shall we say, kind of layered over in a senate with other people.
well, I would certainly support that because I do feel, as you have described, that there were times that faculty collectively really needed more of an opportunity, whether it would have been worthwhile to spend the time to assemble that single position or not, I'm not certain, but at least it should have been more clearly articulated. So I would have supported that.
Do you think that there's less camaraderie among faculty now, the notion that you described when you came here, and I'd agree with that, I might add, in the history department, of the departments as a sense of community, that has been lost as we change the expectations of what faculty must do to attain tenure, etc.?
I really believe so, at least in the case of my department. Just the transition to the current model of scholarly productivity seemed to drive wedges, not based on those doing scholarly activity versus those doing less or very little at all, although I think that was a factor at a subsurface level, that young faculty could look upon some full professors in my department and question, I think quite honestly, how they had ever achieved that rank. But I also think that there were there were less, maybe even eventually opportunities for social interaction, and certainly there seemed to be less interest in it on everyone's part. I suppose, you know, maybe we're just collectively ready to go home at the end of the day, but you know, I would say that the days, you know, when the geography department had their own table at the Chug are not evident to my knowledge. So anyway.
Yeah, no, that's certainly a shame. That would agree. Well, I want to go back to the question about town and gown, because I think it's a specific topic area, and that is to ask you again over your career at Ball State how you view the relationship between the campus and the community. What is generically referred to as the town and the gown?
I used to stop at a small restaurant on the corner of Jackson and Manning, Ray's restaurant. In fact, I used to take classes there in the evening and teach an entire night section in the restaurant, and Ray would provide us coffee and treats throughout the evening. I very quickly learned in 1971, and I'm not certain that I knew it as a graduate student or an undergraduate, but this institution is frequently referred to by members of the community as simply the college. So I have made kind of a mental record over the years of the extent to which that term is or is not used, and I simply try to be a good listener in a non-invasive way in restaurants and areas around the community, and although I hear it far less often, it still is in the minds of, I think, a segment of Muncie, that college out on the northwest corner of town. And I believe there is a cleavage, maybe it is the river, that's in some cases, I believe, only held together by the strength of employment. That a number of staff cross the river and go to the college because that's where they work, and that is where their health insurance comes from, and their tuition remission opportunities, much appreciated, I might add, are made available. But in terms of everyday interaction, there's a relatively clear void that is not too frequently crossed between the town and the gown. But at the same time I say that, I know that at other levels there are strong relationships, and I think it sort of depends on the audience that you're in, whether this is the college and those are the kids that, you know, used to lie out on the lawn and throw, as I heard one people say, those plastic plates around, the frisbees. That it's an almost ideal life. No one does much of anything, including the faculty, and it's always a problem to drive through that area at the wrong time. And every Monday you can read about their escapades that occurred over Friday and Saturday. So I think there is a measure of animosity that still exists, and will probably continue for some time.
Do you think that it's better now than it was when you came here, as far as attempts, at least on behalf of the university, to try to let the people in the community know all the things that people like you and lots of others, faculty, students, administrators, do in terms of service to the Muncie area? Well,
I can't speak relative to my own career. I'm not certain too many people knew or cared, you know, that I served on two boards, or, you know, was involved with a local radio station or the television. But I think the university has been very successful in efforts, particularly out of the College of Architecture. I think they've been a wonderful resource for the city. I think Emmons Auditorium has been a significant, or at least a potentially significant resource, kind of limited for a number of reasons in what they can present. I'm not certain that athletics, as an extension of the university, has made an impact in this community that would be, say, comparable to Mount Pleasant, where Central Michigan is.
Right.
So I think we've reached out, and I think we've provided some very legitimate services and given important directions, but at the same time, I think that there are departments that for one reason or another lack that kind of vehicle for moving into the community, or maybe having it, and they have not yet done a very good job in disseminating their own contributions. So.
Okay. You think Muncie's been a good place for you as far as a place to live and raise a family?
Yeah, I do. It's the hometown of my children. I think overall they had a positive school experience. They went through the public schools. They were active in athletics. I think if you are married and if you have a family, and particularly in some cases if you have a community of faith affiliation, it's very easy to feel at home in Muncie. It has not been easy in our department's history for single or gay faculty to feel at home in Muncie. I've lost two wonderful and highly competent female colleagues for that reason. So I think there are some situations that are more negative than maybe we think.
But yet when you mention single faculty, particularly gay faculty, what I've noticed over the years is as Indianapolis has grown north, that more and more faculty, regardless of their sexual preference, but certainly being single has a lot to do with it, that they now sort of, as I put it, vote with their automobiles and don't see it as detrimental to live on the north side of Indy and to drive in 332, where they find, and particularly with semester change, where you can be here Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, and there's a lot more flexibility in that regard. So they say, well, okay, I don't think Muncie is a very friendly place for me to be, so I'm not going to live in Muncie. I'll go live in Indianapolis.
Exactly. I have two colleagues, or recently former colleagues, both of whom live in Fishers. We have about a third of our professional staff in the department that live in Indianapolis with the Indiana Smoke-Free program. They find it very difficult to even turn in unopened the United Way materials that I send them, because I'm always the United Way representative in our department. So I think Indianapolis has been a factor, and in a couple of cases outside the department, I think Anderson has even been a factor. You know, when they offered the 3-year setback on property tax if you would build a new residence in Madison County. I would share a title that I have gained recently as the man who killed Ed Ball. Very near to the end of Mr. Ball's life, he was asked to project what he saw as the University of the Future. And in that article, appearing in the Alumni magazine, he wanted to see virtually non-tenured faculty. So I wrote a letter to the Alumni magazine reminding him that he had been tenured into this community on the basis of birth, while I had spent 30 years of my life becoming tenured, and I outlined the people that I had befriended and the organizations I had supported and the houses that I had moved into and out of and the automobiles that I had bought, and I challenged him as to whether contract faculty would be quite that committed to life in his Muncie. Shortly after that article was published in the following edition of the Alumni magazine, he died, and I walked into a meeting several months ago, and someone stood up and said, "Oh, here comes the guy that killed Ed Ball."
I must confess, Wayne, in our long friendship, I never heard that. I do recall Ed Ball's piece. I do recall your rejoinder, but there probably were other things that...
Oh, I think like 92 years of
Yeah,
age or
right,
something,
yeah,
but
would catch up with it.
anyway.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add? Any other reflections or comments as you look back, as I said, on a long and distinguished career as a member of Ball State faculty?
Probably the one thing that was always a bright spot for me in and out of the classroom, and I met one of these individuals at the parade just on Saturday past, and that was the arrival of non-traditional students. I eventually reached a point near the end of my career when I would say to colleagues, "I'll trade you 3 traditional age students for 1 non-traditional student." I don't know, maybe for the purists, the arrival of non-traditional students has been less important than for me, coming out of some of the background experiences that I have had. But I really have been proud of the university for facilitating the return of older students to the classroom, particularly on a full-time basis. So I would say, that is something that I would call particular attention to, because I have had so many of those students.
I agree with you about their contribution. I often look back on my career and think of an American history class I taught at Grand Rapids Junior College back in the 1960s, and the best students in that class were beauticians and meat cutters at a local meat market. I mean, they had the zeal that was certainly not what I experienced during my regular classes during the day.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for your time. I really
You're
appreciate
welcome,
your help
Warren.
with the
I
project.
enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Good questions.
Thank you.